Grappling with the text, I'm Pastor Wolfmuller. We're into Philippians chapter 3 today, verse 1, where Paul says, we are the circumcision who don't boast in the flesh, but rejoice in Jesus. He's countering those false teachers that were following him around, trying to say, no, it's not enough just to believe in Jesus. You also have to keep the law of Moses. We'll see what Paul says. Let's grapple with the text. All right, grappling with the text, Philippians chapter 3, finally. Now, look, Paul's going to go for another chapter, but we're about halfway through. But finally, and he's going to get to some summary points. This is really quite something. Now, we want to remember that everywhere Paul went, there's Turkey, and there's Greece, and then there's Italy, and wherever Paul was going, there was always right behind him, in the shadow of the preaching of the gospel, there was a shadow of the false gospel. And especially it took the form of the Judaizers. These are those who are coming along and saying, no, look, before you become a Christian, you have to be Jewish, you have to be circumcised, and so forth. And this was Paul's main opponent everywhere. And it seems like those Judaizers had come over here to Philippi, and they had gained a little bit of ground. At least they had found space to preach. And so Paul is going to get after those guys who are assaulting the gospel, saying it's just not enough to go for the grace of God and the mercy of God and the kindness of God. You have to have grace and works, those two. And Paul just gets after them, especially those who are saying that you have to have grace plus circumcision. But look what he says here. Finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things to you, to me, is not grievous or wearisome, but for you it's safe. So what is the same thing? The answer is rejoice. Look, always rejoice. And the joy is not in ourselves. It's a joy in the Lord. It's a divine, holy joy. It's a Christian joy. And how do we rejoice in the Lord? Well, this rejoicing in the Lord has to do with the bewaring, the being ware. So that there are thieves of joy. And this is what Paul wants to get after. And this is so important. False doctrine steals joy. False doctrine equals a joy thief. So that if you have, I wonder how many lines we want our F's to have. False doctrine is a joy thief. So if we want to have joy, if we want to protect our joy, then we have to beware of false teachers. And look what Paul calls them. Beware of the dogs. Beware of evil workers. Beware of the circumcision or of the mutilation, concision there. I wonder what that Greek word is. Let's see here. Let's beware of the katatoimein, the mutilation. Beware of the mutilation. Do you see what's going on here? So there's those guys saying, "Hey, you have to be circumcised. You have to be brought into the Jewish faith through circumcision first." And look what Paul calls them, the mutilation. I wonder if that's anywhere else. No, only here. Look at this nice app that tells you these things. It's only here in the whole Bible. That's the one time it shows up. So beware of the mutilation. Beware of the self-mutilators. These are, to call someone a dog, an evil worker, and a mutilator is not nice. Now we would say, hey, Paul, why so mean? Why raging? What's going on? Well, it was these guys, these dogs, false evil workers, the mutilators, who were saying you have to be circumcised to be a Christian, and they were, by adding grace to works, they were assaulting grace. It reminds us of Galatians when Paul says, if anyone comes and speaks a different gospel, then let them be anathema. It reminds us of this great phrase from Luther. Remember the Luther phrase where he says, every heresy strikes at Christ. This is an important sort of thing. So he says, forget these guys. Then look what he continues. Now, this is a setup for what's coming next. And the thing that's coming next here in Philippians, I mean, this is going to just build up to some of the most beautiful gospel stuff that's coming next. But Paul's going to set it up, and we'll let him do it. He says, for we are the circumcision who worship God in the Spirit, who rejoice in Jesus Christ, and we have no confidence in the flesh. So there's three marks of the circumcision. Remember the argument there in Philippi for the Judaizers and wherever they went was, we are the circumcision, you have to be circumcised. And Paul says, no, this is what it means to be circumcised. To worship God in the Spirit. 2, to rejoice in Christ Jesus. And 3, to have no confidence in the flesh. The mark of these mutilators is that they have confidence in the flesh. Look, I'm circumcised, they would say. That means I'm holier than you. I'm closer to God than you, or whatever. And Paul says, no, look, it's a mark of spiritual circumcision, of true circumcision, of the circumcision of the heart, which the Bible speaks of over and over. This circumcision it rejoices in Christ, it worships God, and it doesn't have confidence in the flesh. Though I might have confidence in the flesh. Paul's going to say, if anyone could have confidence in the flesh like these false teachers, it would be me. If any other man thinks that he is something that he might trust in the flesh, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day, so I was a baby. I was born into this thing. I'm not an adult convert. Of the stock of Israel, I'm a true Israelite. Of the tribe of Benjamin, even more specifically, Paul was part of the Benjamite tribe. A Hebrew of Hebrews, concerning the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is of the law, blameless. So Paul says these guys who are coming along saying that they're truer than St. Paul says, oh yeah, really? You want to have a little contest? You want to see who has more to boast about? Well, let's just check their credentials. Are they Benjamites? Are they Pharisees? Did they persecute the church? You want to know how Jewish I was? Paul says I was going around throwing women and babies in jail for being Christians. That's how zealous I was. Look at these guys, got nothing on me. But all these things, he says, I count as a loss. I count as rubbish. Scubala. But that has to wait till next week. So Paul's setting up the argument here. We just have to stop it because we ran out of page. But Paul's setting up the argument saying, look, these false teachers are boasting in all these things. I have much more to boast in, but I don't, because these things don't matter. What matters is that we worship God in the Spirit, hearing and believing His Word, that we rejoice in Christ Jesus, this is the faith which trusts the forgiveness of sins, and that we don't put confidence in the flesh. We don't let works find their way in to the gospel. You remember this illustration. If you have a glass of water, and you look at this nice glass of water, and then you just put a little bit of dirt in there, well, you know what you have? Mud. It's not water anymore. It's not pure water anymore. So that the same thing happens if you have the pure gospel, but then you mix in a little bit of false doctrine. You don't have the pure gospel anymore. If you have the pure gospel, mix in a little bit of law, you don't have the gospel anymore. You've got something different, and Paul won't stand for it. So he has to cut off, if you would, he has to cut off all reliance on works for righteousness so that we can have Christ. Well, we'll see that in the weeks to come. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week. This video is in memory of Saint Luella, the theologian, who we laid to rest today in the sure hope of the resurrection of the dead. May God grant us all to attain to the joy that she has now. And thanks for being part of this grappling. It's really stunning to put our nose to the text and see what the Lord has there. Really, we're just ramping up today so that next week Paul's going to lay it on the gospel, and we're getting to the gospel highlight of the book of Philippians. So if you want to read ahead, you can do that. That's all right. But otherwise, we'll see you back here next week.